SFX, distant thunder of artillery, then silence. Wind whistling across an empty field. Visual, faded black and white footage of inflatable Sherman tanks scattered across a French meadow. Narrator, calm, deliberate. It was June 1944. The Allies had landed in Normandy. But as German panzer divisions moved to crush the invasion, something strange began to unfold across the French countryside. Entire armored divisions appeared overnight. Columns of Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and artillery pieces stretching for miles. German reconnaissance pilots spotted them, reported them, and command prepared to strike. But when they did, there was nothing there. SFX, wind deflating rubber, faint creaking of canvas. Visual, close-up of an air valve releasing air from a fake tank. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were artists, actors, sound engineers, and set designers. Men from New York art schools and Hollywood studios, armed not with rifles, but with paint, speakers, and inflatable tanks. For months, they waged war in total secrecy, using deception, illusion, and sound to mislead the German army on a scale never seen before. Their mission was simple: make the enemy believe an entire Allied force was somewhere it wasn't. And somehow they succeeded. This is the untold story of how 1,100 men changed the course of World War II without ever firing a shot. SFX, heartbeat slow and tense. Visual, fade to title, The Ghost Army, the World War II unit that fought with inflatable tanks. Narrator, but before their genius could save lives, it had to stay invisible. Reason to keep watching. The world's most unusual combat unit was about to play its first deadly game of make-believe. They called themselves the Ghost Army. Visual, montage, 1939 to 1941 newsreels of Europe under Nazi occupation. SFX, marching boots, war drums. Narrator, by 1942, the Allies faced a grim truth. Defeating Nazi Germany would take more than strength. It would take imagination. The Germans were masters of misdirection, camouflaging their tanks, creating fake airfields, and using false radio chatter to confuse their enemies. To win, the Allies would have to fight deceit with deceit. Enter the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret even many in the U.S. Army never knew it existed. Conceived by Colonel Billy Harris and Major Ralph Ingersoll, this group would bring together soldiers with backgrounds in art, design, theater, and sound engineering. Among them were men who would later become famous. Bill Blass, the future fashion designer; Ellsworth Kelly, who would go on to be a celebrated painter; and Art Kane, a photographer whose lens would later define American culture. But in 1944, they were soldiers of illusion. SFX, pencil sketching, air compressor humming. Visual, artists painting camouflage, inflating rubber tanks. Each member was trained not in marksmanship, but in deception. They studied camouflage, sound projection, and psychological warfare. Their mission was to impersonate entire divisions, convincing the Germans that massive Allied forces were preparing to attack, where none existed. Lieutenant Fred Fox once wrote in his diary, "We were like magicians in uniform. Our weapons were secrecy and surprise." The idea had roots in earlier deception efforts. In North Africa, Operation Bertram had fooled Rommel's Afrika Korps into expecting an attack from the wrong direction. Now, the Americans would take it further, combining visual, sonic, and radio trickery into one coordinated force. Their base of operations, Camp Forest, Tennessee. Their cover story, topographical engineers. Their real job, make the impossible believable. Visual, maps showing Europe with red arrows marking invasion plans. As the Allies prepared for D-Day, deception became a weapon. Operation Bodyguard and Operation Fortitude had already convinced Hitler that the invasion would land at Pas-de-Calais. The Ghost Army would ensure that illusion continued long after the first boots hit Normandy. Narrator, the stage was set for one of the strangest battles in military history. A war fought not with bullets, but with imagination. Reason to keep watching. The Ghost Army was about to deploy for the first time, and their success or failure would decide the fate of thousands on the front lines. Visual, archival footage, landing crafts, soldiers waiting ashore on D-Day. SFX, surf crashing, gunfire echoing. Narrator. By late June 1944, the beaches of Normandy were secured. But the Allies faced a new challenge, breaking out of the hedgerows and pushing toward Paris. German divisions were regrouping fast, and every move the Allies made was under constant watch. That's when the Ghost Army was called in. Their first mission, Operation Brest, in August 1944. The goal was to mislead the Germans into believing a massive armored assault was forming to the east, drawing their defenses away from the real offensive. Visual, inflatable tanks being rolled out, painted under camouflage nets. SFX, air pumps inflating, murmuring soldiers. Private Jack Macy, a designer from Brooklyn, later recalled, "We worked like stagehands. In a day, we could create an army where none existed. By nightfall, we'd vanish, leaving only footprints and tire track behind." They erected 93 inflatable Sherman tanks, 500 fake trucks, and even set up a dummy artillery battery. Loudspeakers the size of Jeeps blasted pre-recorded sounds of armored movement. Engines rumbling, men shouting orders, metal clanking. SFX, layered mechanical rumble and distant shouting. The effect was astonishing. German reconnaissance aircraft spotted the division and immediately reported its position. Enemy command shifted resources, buying precious time for the real forces attacking elsewhere. It was the perfect illusion, but also a dangerous one. The Ghost Army worked only a few miles from enemy lines. One wrong move, a misplaced tent, an accidental light at night, and the deception could unravel. Lieutenant Bernie Mason wrote in a letter home, "We carried pistols, but we weren't supposed to use them. If the Germans ever found us, our job was to disappear." As summer turned to autumn, their missions grew riskier. Each operation demanded greater precision, perfect radio mimicry, flawless camouflage, and split-second timing. The Ghost Army learned to impersonate entire divisions, using fake insignias, forged paperwork, and even conversations in bars where German spies might listen. SFX, bar chatter, glasses clinking. Narrator. Every mission brought new danger. Every success saved lives. Reason to keep watching. Ahead lay their most daring illusion of all, an operation that would pit artists and engineers against the full weight of the German army. Visual, dark forest, mist rolling over the Moselle River. SFX, distant artillery, thunder rumbling. Narrator. September 1944. The Allies were pushing into France. The Ninth Army needed to cross the Moselle near Metz, but German forces were heavily entrenched. If they discovered the real crossing point, the entire offensive could fail. The Ghost Army was tasked with creating a phantom army to the south, Operation Bedembourg, to draw enemy fire and attention away from the real advance. Visual, soldiers inflating tanks under rain, setting up fake radio stations. SFX, rain on canvas, generators humming. In total darkness, they built an entire illusion. 350 inflatable tanks, 50 artillery pieces, and a full motor pool, complete with soundtracks recorded at Fort Knox. Over loudspeakers, they blasted the noise of an armored column moving through mud. SFX, roaring engines shouted commands. Corporal Harold Dahl later remembered. It was eerie. You could hear the tanks, smell the fuel, but it was all air and paint. German scouts took the bait. Within 24 hours, enemy artillery began pounding the empty fields of Bedembourg, convinced they'd found the Allied attack. Meanwhile, the real Ninth Army slipped across the Moselle almost unopposed. But success came at a cost. During one-night operation, a German patrol stumbled too close. In the darkness, a Ghost Army truck was hit. 2 men were killed, Sergeant Bob Tompkins and Private Lou Hall. They became some of the few casualties in a unit that officially did not exist. Qu'est-ce fixe? Meufle d'explosion? Renfalling. The men pressed on. They couldn't reveal what they'd been doing, even to other Allied soldiers. Their identity was their disguise. By late 1944, they had conducted over 20 deception missions, each more complex than the last. But nothing compared to what awaited them in early 1945, Operation Fearson. Their final act would be their masterpiece, an illusion so convincing that it fooled the German High Command itself. Narrator: it would mark the height of the Ghost Army's deception and its greatest risk. Reason to keep watching. The war's most brilliant illusion was about to unfold under the guns of the Rhine. Visual: map of the Rhine River, March 1945. SFX: heavy machinery, distant artillery. Narrator: March 1945. The Allies stood at the banks of the Rhine, the final natural barrier before Germany itself. General Eisenhower needed to cross, but the Germans expected it. Every move would be watched. That's when the Ghost Army launched Operation Fearson. Their task: impersonate two entire divisions, the 30th and the 79th Infantry, at a location 20 miles south of the real crossing point. Visual: aerial shot of hundreds of dummy vehicles spread across open fields. SFX: trucks rumbling, air compressors shouted orders. For 3 days, the Ghost Army created a world of lies. They set up 600 inflatable vehicles, fake headquarters, and even a decoy supply depot. Artillery sounds boomed across the valley, perfectly timed with radio transmissions mimicking divisional chatter. Private Fred Fox later said, "It was theater. We were the actors. The Germans were our audience. And the stage was Europe." Meanwhile, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine at night, almost unopposed. German commanders, deceived by the illusion, diverted their artillery and reinforcements toward the fake divisions. In one of the most successful deception operations of the war, the Ghost Army saved thousands of lives. But when victory came weeks later, their role remained secret. Their missions were classified for over 40 years. Families received no medals, no public acknowledgement, only silence. SFX: faint typewriter clicking. Visual: black and white letters marked top secret. Corporal Ed Mears once reflected, "We came home with no glory, no recognition. But if our silence meant others could live, it was worth it." As Europe celebrated liberation, the men of the Ghost Army quietly packed away their canvas tanks and rubber artillery. Their war had been one of shadows, and now they would vanish back into them. Narrator: the guns had fallen silent, but their deception would echo for decades. Reason to keep watching. What became of these artists of war, and why their legacy matters now more than ever. Visual: modern aerial footage of Normandy beaches and French countryside. SFX: soft orchestral music rising. Narrator: for decades, the Ghost Army story was hidden behind classified files. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians began to uncover the truth and the astonishing scope of their operations. Between 1944 and 1945, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops conducted more than 20 major deception missions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Collectively, they are estimated to have saved between 15,000 and 30,000 lives. Their tactics laid the foundation for modern psychological warfare, electronic deception, and even the camouflage techniques used by militaries today. SFX: static of old radios, morphing into modern digital sound waves. Visual: transition from World War II radios to modern radar and digital screens. In 2013, the U.S. Congress finally recognized their contribution. Members of the Ghost Army received the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest honors. At the ceremony, surviving veteran Bernie Mason said, "We fought not with bullets, but with brains. We didn't want to kill, we wanted to confuse." Their story continues to inspire artists, filmmakers, and soldiers alike. A reminder that creativity can be as powerful as courage. But the legacy goes deeper still. Many of the men returned to civilian life, carrying lessons from their strange war. Bill Blass built an empire in fashion. Ellsworth Kelly transformed modern art. Others became teachers, photographers, designers, quietly shaping post-war culture. Visual: montage of post-war America, Art galleries, fashion shows, city skylines. Narrator. They had learned that illusion could save lives, and that sometimes the greatest weapon is not destruction, but deception. Their motto, though never official, still echoes through history. We deceive, therefore we win. SFX, swelling orchestral theme. Visual, fade from modern landscapes to faded photos of the Ghost Army standing beside their inflatable tanks. Narrator, final lines. In a world that often glorifies force, the Ghost Army stands as proof of something different. That imagination, courage, and illusion can change the course of history. And though their war ended in silence, their story will never fade again. Visual, fade to black, dedicated to the soldiers of the Ghost Army, 1944 to 1945. SFX, single trumpet note, then silence. The Ghost Army fought with imagination instead of bullets. Honor their legacy by liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing for more hidden stories from the war that changed the world.